to my Year 12 psychology students. Welcome to the second video for the brain and nervous system, and of course the SAC is on May 29th, so please make sure you've got that in your diary. So this is really a revision of the content you've done in the last week, so you probably don't really need to take many notes. Feel free to take notes, but you don't have to, as you would have most of these notes anyway. So you've learnt about the nervous system. You've learnt about the various areas within the brain. That was the very last slide of the last presentation we did. And if you haven't got your head around that, please stop, go back and watch that video again before you continue on with this video, because this video doesn't have any diagrams. It's just simply talking about those structures. So let's talk about the different areas of the brain when it works. When it does this. Okay, so the first area that you need to be aware of is the motor cortex, and of course the motor cortex is found at the rear. It's the rear strip of the frontal lobe. So we have a left and right motor cortex at the back of our frontal lobe. Basically, this is the main function of it is the control of your skeletal muscles, the ones that you have conscious control over, which means that it actually sends motor information via efferent neurons to move these particular muscles. So it's actually involved in the sending of the information. Motor information is always sent out from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So know where it is, know what it's involved in. We also know that in terms of our body parts, every body part that's attached to a skeletal muscle is represented on our motor cortex, but some parts of the body are represented more than others. So for instance, let's hope my computer doesn't die, by the way. So for instance, parts of the body that move a lot will have a higher proportion of the motor cortex allocated to them. So your hands and your mouth. This basically means that there are more neural connections from that part of the body to the motor cortex, so therefore more space because of the more neural connections. Also remember about the organisation of it, and that it's contralaterally organised. So that means that the left motor cortex sends information to the right side of the body, and the right motor cortex sends information to the left side of the body, and the top of the motor cortex sends motor information to the bottom half of the body, and the bottom part of the cortex sends information to the top half of the body. Okay, the somatosensory cortex is found at the front of the parietal lobe. Again, we have a left and right somatosensory cortex. Remember, some books might call it primary somatosensory cortex. Basically means the same thing. And this is responsible for processing sensations. So it receives sensory information from afferent neurons. So information is coming into the somatosensory cortex. This information, again, the space that's dedicated to each part of the body is dependent upon how sensitive that body part is. So for instance, again, our hands and our mouth, and of course the third part, our genitals, are the most sensitive part of our body. So therefore they're actually represented by a large space on the somatosensory cortex because there are more neural pathways or neural connections from those body parts to the somatosensory cortex. So basically more information going up. The other thing is, of course, they're contralaterally organised as well, the same as the motor cortex. So the left somatosensory cortex receives information from the right side of the body, whereas the right somatosensory cortex receives information from the left side of the body. The top receives information from the bottom of the body, and the bottom of the cortex receives information from the top of the body. Just note that the motor cortex sends information, and the somatosensory cortex receives information. That's why I keep emphasising those words, send and receives. Okay, you also learnt about two different types of aphasia. You know that aphasia means impairment of language caused by brain damage. That was on the exam one year, knowing that definition. The first one is Broca's aphasia. So Broca's area is found in only the left side of the frontal lobe. And we know that this is involved in the production of speech. So people with Broca's aphasia produce little speech, lots of gaps, really struggle to actually generate those words. So therefore it's described as non-fluent speech, slow speech, poor articulation, so words aren't pronounced very well. Short words are often left out. They might have trouble finding the right words. However, they have no problem listening to the speech of others. and in fact writing either. I should have added that to the slide. So it's the actual production of their own speech is the only issue that they have with. Know at least two of the dot points that are there because that is a common exam question. They will often ask you two characteristics of Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's aphasia. So Wernicke's aphasia, damage to Wernicke's area, which is in the left temporal lobe only. These people's speech is fluent, so it flows really well, but it actually doesn't make any sense, so it's incoherent. Individual words are articulated well, so they pronounce each word fine, but they don't use the right words, and like I said, it's basically a word salad, just doesn't make sense. They also have difficulty understanding both written and spoken language of others as well. So Wernicke's aphasia is slightly worse to live with than Broca's aphasia. Clearly you would prefer not to have either of them. Okay, spatial neglect. This is usually as a result of damage to the right parietal lobe. Very occasionally it's the left parietal lobe, but in most cases it's the right parietal lobe, and the patient ends up ignoring the left side of their world. So they might only shape half of their face or draw half of a picture. They can still see that side of the world, it's just that they don't acknowledge that it's there. So there's nothing wrong with their occipital lobe, it is their parietal lobe that's actually damaged. That's about all you need to know about spatial neglect. Split brain studies, we know that some people that have severe epilepsy have their corpus callosum split, and we know that the corpus callosum is a structure that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So by splitting these, basically what it does is prevents communication between these two hemispheres, and basically the communication that is happening is the sensory and motor information crossing over. So it stops that information crossing over when need be. We know that the left visual field of each eye sends information to the right visual cortex in the right occipital lobe, and we know that the right visual field of each eye sends information to the left visual cortex in the left occipital lobe. Remember, information from the left eye goes to both hemispheres. Information from the right eye goes to both hemispheres. If you notice in what I've written, it's the left visual field, so the left side of both of your eyes, that information will go to the right occipital lobe and vice versa. So when the corpus callosum is cut, information can't travel from one visual cortex to the other side of the brain. For most of us, we never actually experience this problem, but even people with split brain surgery don't actually experience the phenomena that you're about to learn about unless they're staring at a dot at the centre of a screen, and you'll remember back to that video that you watched. Okay, so basically people when have had split brain surgery and they're asked to focus on a dot, if information is presented to the left visual field, so the left side of that dot, the information goes to the right visual cortex. However, we know in our right hemisphere there are no language centres, so therefore the person can't name what they saw. Okay. However, they can point to it or draw it with their left hand because the information is in their right hemisphere, which controls the left side of their body. When information is presented to the right visual field, we know that this information will go to the left visual cortex, and there are language centres in our left hemisphere, so the person can name what they saw. Even for us who don't have split brains, if information is sent to our left visual field and then goes to our right hemisphere, it will still take a fraction of a second for it to cross over the corpus callosum before we could say what we had actually seen. So it still has to cross over for us. In people with split brain, it has no possibility of crossing over. So therefore they can't name it. For us, we can name it, but the information would just be slightly slower because it has to cross over that corpus callosum. So our response in naming something that goes to our left visual field would be slightly slower. If it went to our right visual field, it would be very quick because it would already be in the left language hemisphere. So basically, Sperry and Kazinga, when they looked at these studies, it really supported the idea that the left hemisphere controls verbal tasks, whereas the right hemisphere is involved in non-verbal type tasks. And it really also emphasised the fact that even though some tasks are carried out in one hemisphere like language, most tasks actually involve coordination of both of your hemispheres. So they're the basically results of their experiments and what they've been able to find. The last thing that you really need to know is just about the brain and how it relates to memory. And there's only really, even though I've got a couple of structures here, the only two structures that they'll probably ask you about is the hippocampus and the amygdala. Again, you don't need to know where these structures are. Just know that the hippocampus is involved in the formation of declarative memories. So they're any memories that are not procedural ones. So things like episodic memories or general knowledge about the world, semantic memories. And it's also what allows consolidation to occur. So for memories to actually set in concrete during that 30 minutes after the memory has formed to ensure that it then transfers to long-term memory. So that's the hippocampus. And I guess you can remember because it's got a C in it, that it's consolidation, and maybe remember that D comes after C, declarative memory. The cerebral cortex is basically what allows our short-term memory to function. So that's the thin layering over our entire forebrain. And it's involved in some aspects of declarative memory. Would you be asked a question on that? Probably not. But hey, at least I've put it in there and I can say I've taught you. The amygdala for emotional aspects of memory that involves, you're going to see that, oops. Any memory that actually involves emotion, your amygdala will be activated as well. That's all you need to know about the amygdala. The basal ganglia, another structure, that's what's involved in procedural memories, and your frontal lobes tend to get activated when there are episodic memories. Okay, clearly my computer's going to die, so luckily we're at the last slide. That's all you need to know for your SAC, and I thought...
Have 40 people to the game. Yeah. They said they run through 9:30, so they're doing. I've just sent it to Mel. Yeah, and do you want me to forward the email to YouTube? Yeah. Well, I was having a look at the pamphlet that's on the link that I sent you, Steve.